Hey y'all, it is a rainy, overcast day in Chicago, so let's do an August reading wrap up, if for no other reason than because a bunch of these books are due back at the library, and I need to take care of that. So, feeling like I'm getting a little bit back into a groove this past month in that there are books I read that I didn't talk about during Feature Fridays, so let's jump right in with a book I haven't talked about during Feature Friday, American Royalty by Tracy Livesay. This is, I'm sure, not a surprise to realize is a royalty romance and loosely inspired by Harry and Meghan, but right up my alley for sure. So it follows Danielle Duchess, a popular American rapper, as she is trying to branch out beyond her music career because she's feeling very stifled, particularly by management and the image they've curated for her. So she has actually started a very successful skin line, kind of a la Fenty, and she's getting ready to partner with a bigger brand related to that company so that she can expand her product offerings and just gain more momentum in the market and really position herself as a businesswoman first and foremost. But her goal is impeded because a white pop star with only one hit under her name but a rabid fan base has decided that the best way to kind of stay culturally relevant is to fake a feud with Duchess. But the people online don't know it's fake, and so she is kind of really inserting herself into Duchess's career to lift herself up, and this has directly impacted Duchess's ability to sell her company. Meanwhile, Jameson is a prince, his uncle is in line to inherit the throne, but the royal family's image is not doing so great, so he gets summoned to the queen, his grandmother, and Jameson has enjoyed a lot of freedom, so to speak, because after his father died, he was kind of taken under the wing of his grandfather, and his mother and his grandfather ended up advocating for him in a way that helped him kind of get out of the limelight and go be a philosophy professor like he really wanted to do. So he is both a prince and a professor, which, yes. And so he gets summoned to his grandmother, who decides he's a new face that can kind of help the royal image. And they're going to do this by throwing a benefit concert for his grandfather's charity. And she kind of holds these charities over his head because he was so close to his grandfather. And so she knows that he will do what he needs to do to protect his grandfather's legacy. But he's not invested in this charity concert at all, or really being a royal and a public-facing royal. And so when his grandmother's aide comes to kind of hound him for a name, for him to contribute a name for the charity concert while he's out at the pub with his friend at university, he just picks a student and asks what's popular, and they end up saying Duchess, and that is how Duchess is brought over for this charity concert. And she is a rapper and has a much different image than the royal family was kind of going for. And Duchess accepts because she sees an opportunity to rehabilitate her image outside of this feud to help sell her company, and also because she found out her management, who she's not been super fond of recently, doesn't think have her best interests at heart. They turned down this opportunity without even bringing it to her. So she sees this as an opportunity to kind of recalibrate. And meanwhile, the palace can't back out of this because it's been so well received by the public. So she shows up early to kind of have some time by herself, and the palace aides have kind of hooked her up with a place to stay that's outside of the public eye, except it's supposed to be the guest house on Jameson's property, and that house is out of commission for whatever reason, so she ends up staying in his home, and they kind of butt heads at first, especially because after Jameson finds out who he has put forward, he looks her up and is very attracted to her in a lot of ways, and we get some of that mentally, and so he feels very awkward seeing her in person after knowing what thoughts he's had about her, and then he comes off kind of rude at first, and it's this whole thing, and so they butt heads at first, but over the course of this stay, they kind of find common ground and begin a flirtation of sorts, just in time for them to have to go into town for this concert, and then they kind of have to pretend like nothing is going on. And so even though Danielle has like at least one friend in this act lineup, a Harry Styles-esque pop star, we then have to watch Jameson be kind of jealous of that, and they're both navigating it. So in some ways, I actually got Prince and Me kind of vibes, in that in the first half, you watch these two fall for each other and connect on a personal level outside of society and the greater world. And in the second half, you watch them have to reckon with the reality of what pursuing this relationship will mean and whether the cost is worth it. But this is much sexier than The Prince and Me. So if you need a royal romance in your life and you are finished with all of the Alyssa Cole books because a new one hasn't come out, you need to read this one. And then moving on to a book I have talked about, The Island of Dr. Moreau by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This is her new release this year that is a twist on The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. It is an update that this time looks at the island through the eyes of Dr. Moreau's daughter, who does not exist in the original, and through the eyes of Montgomery, who does. But here we're getting the inside perspective from on the island rather than the outsider coming in, and it really twists where the danger may be on this island, and it positions the novel within a really dynamic political landscape that makes the outsiders a danger in many ways. And it looks at the power structures and hierarchies that are created by men and how those hierarchies are exploited to benefit the elite and what they are willing to do to maintain their power, where that power comes from, and what happens when those they consider beneath them claim or reclaim their power. So this really creates a rich, dark Gothic atmosphere, but in a much different way than Mexican Gothic, and really solidifies Moreno Garcia's ability to kind of adjust the tone and atmosphere of her novels to fit within the conventions of the genres or tropes or worlds she is exploring, and also continues to utilize those tropes and expectations from readers within specific genre types to both forward the genre and the conversation and play into the tropes where they can forward the plot and really are satisfying, but she also always complicates and twists expectations in ways that really elevates the story and is an active conversation with the form. So I continue to love her work and do need to jump into the couple of backlist titles I haven't read yet for sure. And then I read Wash Day, a graphic novel by Jamila Rouser and Robin Smith. Oddly or not enough, I believe I saw this recommended on TikTok and thought it looked really cute. And it explores a group of 4 friends and their stories all kind of interconnected by the idea of wash day or getting their hair done. I think for some reason when I saw it recommended, I thought it was young adult, but I would argue it's more for like early 20-somethings, or at least that's what the friend group feels like to me. But it's vibrant and loving and fun and just celebrates these young women and their lives, and we follow their kind of struggles in love and career and just like the weird stories you're gonna tell your friends. But it also tackles serious subjects, such as one of the friends is struggling with depression, and that story was a little hard for me at times because the other friend that was brought into that narrative kind of fell a little bit into toxic positivity, but I do think that that was addressed later in the kind of wrap up. They're all out for a night, and Cookie, the friend who was a little borderline toxic positivity, checks in with Devine and makes sure, because they're all talking about maybe going to a new spot, and Cookie checks in with her and was like, are you okay with that, basically? And then they all go home and have a slumber party instead. And you can just feel the love and care here, and I really loved how it was structured, this idea of seeing them all kind of separately, watching how they weave in and out of each other's lives in different ways, and then watching them all come together as a friend group and celebrate that friendship and the love that that friendship is. So yeah, definitely glad I saw this recommendation and would recommend it myself for sure. And then I read Tokyo Dreaming, which is the sequel to Tokyo Ever After, and I think that, again, if you liked The Princess Diaries, this feels like an older Princess Diaries because the character is older, but the tone feels similar in a lot of ways, that quirkiness especially. I almost wish that we had started with this character a little earlier, we had seen her a little younger, so that that voice felt a little bit more grounded in that, but neither here nor there. This follows Izumi when she is in Japan, and her mother is in Japan with her. Her mother and father have kind of rekindled their flirtation, and Izumi is very focused on allowing them to be together because her father proposes to her mother, and her mother says yes, but they're having trouble getting larger council and cultural approval. And Izumi decides she's going to do whatever she needs to do to make this happen, including going to university, which is a thing that she's been kind of waffling about. And in the meantime, her own love life gets more complicated because Akio goes away to his pilot program and breaks up with her before leaving, and she is devastated. But in her pursuit of preparing for university and applying to this competitive university in hopes of solidifying the family unit she's dreamed of through her mother and father's marriage, she is given a tutor that complicates her love life even more. And amidst all of this as well, she faces off with her cousins, the Shining Twins again, and they get sent away for a weekend, a long weekend at one point, because they break something very valuable, and their grandmother is like, this is enough. you guys need to learn to get along. And they are, of course, very resentful of that at first, though they would never show their grandmother that. And they have no intention of letting this weekend allow them to get closer, but it does. And I really like that dynamic and that development. I was more connected to the filial relationships and dynamics and the weight of responsibility and choice for Azumi in this one than I was to the romantic side of things. And the romance side of things in this was definitely a major plot line, but I'm kind of glad they balanced it out a little because I didn't super connect with the romance and the romantic side of things, but I really connected, like I said, again, with the family side of things and also the friendship side of things. We're watching Azumi and her friends from high school kind of navigate that shifting as they enter college and, real life, depending on what that's going to look like for Azumi. And at one point, one of her friends visits her in Japan, and they kind of have to deal with how different things feel and talk that out. And that felt very real. But yeah, if you like to make habit back in the 2000s, or even in like the 2010s-ish era, what was that series that came out about like the geeky girl that became a model? Those kinds of series, that kind of tone, I think that this is the perfect kind of modern version of that. And I hope Amika Jean continues to give us peeks into that world for Azumi via new books. And then I read The Book Eaters by Soon-Yi Dean. This is about a young woman, Devon, who is raised isolated in the countryside with her family of book eaters. And I mean that very literally. They eat books and they're not human. But we are getting this through a contemporary timeline where Devon is on the run with her mind eater son, chasing after an elusive book eater family that has a medicine that will allow it so her son isn't compelled to eat minds and can sustain himself on books. But we're also getting flashbacks to her life before and the kind of sinister nature of this world she grew up in and what she is running from. So it's a little bit fantasy, a little bit literary fiction, a little bit thriller, and it kind of takes the central idea of eating books, which sounds very romantic, and warps it and darkens it and complicates it, because we're looking at a society, these book eater society, that falls pretty strictly into harsh gender lines, even as they separate themselves from humans. And so girls like Devon, girls are rare already, are really coddled and treated like princesses, but they are also trapped in many ways and sold off into marriage and forced to bear children. And it really explores the idea of what it means to consume stories and how those stories shape us, because it talks about eating books and how books have different flavor profiles, but it also talks about how in her early life, Devon was fed on fairy tales. We see her sneaking a taste of Jane Eyre and what it means for those stories to kind of shape you. So in some ways, this is a warped, darker fairy tale because there is an edge to this. There is a bite. We start from a place of darkness, and this book is pretty violent, but it's also super compelling and fast-paced. So if you're looking for something that kind of bleeds the edges of a lot of genres and lives in a kind of murky place, something that I think is perfect for fall, I think that this would be right up your alley. And speaking of books perfect for fall, as we head into spooky season, we have Just Like Home by Sarah Galey. This follows a young woman, Vera, as she is returning home for the first time in years to help her dying mother. But her and her mother do not have a great relationship, and this home lives in the shadow of the fact that her father was a serial killer. And in fact, her mother has turned the home into kind of a tourist trap of sorts, in that she has like hard plastic over things, and she invites artists into this space to kind of mind the atmosphere. And so we watch Vera going home and not only dealing with the demons of her past in terms of her father and her relationship with her mother, but also clashing with the artist in residence here, especially as he is the son of the man who wrote the story about Vera's father. And so we're watching Vera kind of pushing back against these outside narratives. Even as the narrative of the book is very contained, we are very much in this house, exploring this house. It's kind of a slow, smoldering, winding reveal, especially the first 100 pages, and Vera talks very lovingly about this place. She talks about it being the house that her father built, and even if we haven't read the blurb and we know what else is going on, we get the sense that there is more going on here, that there is something dangerous lurking. And so we see her kind of squaring off against the past figuratively and potentially literally. There's something else going on in this place, and it kind of explores the idea of what it means to be born of a place that has seen such atrocity. It explores the kind of cultural obsession with these atrocities, though in a lesser degree than I think I was anticipating, and it really explores the idea of home. So if you are interested in kind of that cultural conversation around the fascination with serial killers, if you are interested in kind of the ways places are impacted by the horrors committed in and around them, if you're interested in kind of a tense, spooky atmosphere where you're trying to figure out what is going on, morally gray characters, and not being able to really trust anyone in a narrative. If any of that sounds compelling, this is definitely up your alley. And it also takes some narrative risks at the end that I really appreciate. I'm not sure if it completely succeeds. It takes a deft hand to pull something like the ending of this off, and I think it's a really compelling idea to play with, and I like those kinds of weird twists. Also, as much as I say that this is a kind of internal, reflective, tense novel, the writing is really propulsive, so it never feels slow. There's that element of reflection, but there is always a danger to the atmosphere that keeps things pushing forward. And Galey is also really good at building up atmosphere that is going to lead to readers having questions and then stringing us along for the answers to those questions, giving us payoff in some of those answers, and then also reversing in other ways, in that what we think may be the really big payoff is actually part of the longer string of leading us down to whatever resolution. So I think the structure of this is also really, really interesting and definitely a great option for spooky season. And then let's talk about my two Sarah MacLeans that I read recently. Ironically enough, both number 2 in their respective series. We have One Good Earl Deserts a Lover, which is the second in the Rule of Scoundrels series, which is the series set in the gaming hell of the Fallen Angel, and then Heartbreaker, which is the second in the Hell's Bells series, which is the current ongoing series. So let's start with One Good Earl Deserts a Lover. This is obviously a very well-loved library copy. I love reading mass markets like this from the library with the broken spine and just how comfortable they feel. There is a history here and a weight here, and I love it. But when I'm reading my own mass markets, I am terrified of breaking the spine. So you can see, well, you probably can't, but there were points where I was close and I had to restrain myself. So I actually probably read this a lot slower than I should have, could have, would have, just from not wanting to break the spine. Maybe I should have bought the digital too. I don't know. Back to this. So this follows Pippa and Cross. Pippa is the sister of Penelope, the heroine in A Rogue by Any Other Name. Cross is Bourne's business partner at the Fallen Angel. And in the epilogue of A Rogue by Any Other Name, we watch Cross waking up to Pippa in his office. And we're like, well, what's going on? We get to find out here. So Pippa is engaged, betrothed, what have you, to an earl who by all accounts is very lovely, very nice, but not very bright. And she's set for a double marriage with her sister, who is marrying for love, and by all accounts in society is marrying the next prime minister. But Pippa is anticipating a much more kind of quiet country life. However, Pippa is also very smart, she's very scientific, and so she doesn't like not knowing what is to come. So she sets out to gain more experience, set an experiment, what have you, about marital relations, or at least learn about them so she knows what she's getting into on the wedding night. And she has heard, somehow, that Cross is the guy to see about this. And so she goes to his office and basically asks for his help. And he is like, no, absolutely not. And he, of course, has a tortured past of sorts that has led him to this gaming hell, because all of the owners of this hell have secrets or vendettas or something in their past that is lurking. And here it is that Cross was not supposed to be the Earl, it was supposed to be his brother, but his brother takes his sister to this event, I believe it's Almack's, one night, and Cross was supposed to be taking his sister. And that night there's a carriage accident, his brother dies, and Cross inherits the title. And he is left with the guilt of that, combined with his father straight up telling him for many years that it should have been him. And he internalizes that and believes that. And so throughout the course of this book, Cross is trying to save his sister because her husband has gotten into a debt with a rival gaming hell, and one that Cross has been in an antagonistic relationship with the owner of. And so basically it is the owners of these two hells at odds trying to get one up on each other and protect protect their own, or at least Cross is trying to protect his own. And in the course of this book, this owner of this other gaming hell gets Pippa in his sights. And so while Pippa is still just trying to get answers and showing up at the club because she just needs answers, whether Cross is going to give them or not, he is trying to protect her, and they keep getting thrown together, and feelings, of course, develop. The end of this book is even more satisfying than A Rogue by Any Other Name, and Pippa is a really endearing heroine. Additionally, when did this book come out? It came out in like the 2010s, I want to say. 2013. Pippa feels neurodivergent in a way that is never articulated. It's never a thing, but feels there. It feels like representation. So I can't speak to whether that was intentional or the case, but it feels like it's there. And at least one member of my book club, when we were talking about this, also pointed out like moments where Pippa missed emotional cues that others in the scene kind of had moved on from, but I found that really engaging in the second read. And Pippa is super endearing because she just wants to do right. And so here she's faced with a future that would be comfortable, and the man she is engaged to is not a bad guy. We actually see a scene with him that shows how great a guy he kind of is, and he is willing to offer her protection even knowing that she doesn't love him. And so it really becomes a matter of what you're willing to risk for love and what love is worth. So I'm really excited to be rereading this series, and I'm very excited to revisit No Good Duke Goes Unpunished. And then of course I read Heartbreaker, which I just talked about. This follows Adelaide, our thief from the first Hell's Bells and in the Hell's Bells crew, and the Duke of Claiborne, which she squares off with briefly in the first book. This book has them going on a chase to Gretna Green in pursuit of a couple that is on their way to elope. Adelaide is trying to protect the woman from her father after she has witnessed a murder. Claiborne thinks Adelaide is trying to break the marriage and is trying to protect his brother's heart. Their hearts get involved along the way. There is quipping, there is fighting, there is banter, and there's some really searing emotional intimacy and rawness that I think is only heightened by that action and banter. So I really loved this book. I am enjoying this series for sure. And then I listened to a nonfiction title for book club, even though I ended up not feeling well enough to go to book club, but I'm gonna read that title off to you because as usual with nonfiction, it has a pretty long secondary subtitle. So that book was Entangled Lives: How Fungi Make Our Worlds, Change Our Minds, and Shape Our Futures by Merlin Sheldrake. I listened to this on audio. I was actually shocked because the hold list for this at the library is really long. I hadn't heard of this book before it was recommended at book club, but I'm sure it's getting talked about somewhere from that popularity. It was the kind of perfect nonfiction that really focused in on a subject and made it super compelling. I didn't think that you could make fungi, fungi, so compelling, but you could. And you could tell the author's real passion for the subject matter, how poetic he made it in many cases, and how it looked both at kind of the systems of fungi, also things like how mushrooms have been used historically. So there is a lot in this, a lot to dig into. I know I missed things, especially because I wasn't feeling great the whole time I was listening to it. So I'm definitely gonna have to go back and revisit. But in one of those weird serendipitous moments, there is a historical figure mentioned in Entangled Life that is the loose inspiration for Witches by Brenda Lozano, which I was also reading at the time. And the historical figure is Maria Sabina Magdalena Garcia, who I wasn't aware of before, but is a famous Oaxacan curadera, and apologies as always for my pronunciation. So, Witches by Brenda Lozano. Let's talk about this briefly. I was hoping to talk about this in a feature Friday, but I realized I don't think I have the depth of knowledge to really do justice to diving into the book in that way. I know there are things I missed in this, but I do want to talk about it. This is a short book, but its language is dense and its subject matter is heavy, and I don't mean those as negatives. I just mean this isn't going to be something you're just going to fly through. The language requires you to sit with it and really absorb it, especially because it is moving back and forth between the lives of these two women. So it is framed by a reporter, Zoe, and she goes to interview Feliciana, our curandera, after the murder of Feliciana's cousin, I believe, Paloma, who is the one who brought Feliciana into the language. But this narrative isn't told necessarily through traditional narrative or even traditional like interview styles where we're like in the present interviewing and then flashing back. Rather, it's told through alternating chapters that really explore the lives of both Feliciana and Zoe, and it really explores the hardship and realities of growing up and being a woman in their respective times and places. And there's also a parallelism in both of their relationships with their sisters and their sisters' lives, and comparing and contrasting their lives with their sisters' lives, and how both kind of represent different paths taken. So it looks at all of that hardship, but it also looks at the places where these women are able to claim power and what that power looks like and how they are able to articulate it. And it also looks at the idea of healing and language and legacy. So there is a lot going on in this novel. And like I said, I didn't catch all of it. There are layers and layers here. It talks about kind of intergenerational trauma. It talks about the claiming of power, expectations. It also looks at the very different worlds these women were raised in and lived in, even as they are sharing the earth at the same time. So this was incredibly powerful and deep and layered, even knowing I was only getting a fraction of that because I wasn't aware of some of the larger cultural intricacies. And I found it really compelling that this idea of power was rooted in healing. And so in some ways, this entire book, this entire framing of an interview was, yes, a look at coming into power, but it was also moving to a place of healing to fully claim that power. And I think the narrative in and of itself was a healing in some ways, because it was a claiming of the past and also a kind of purging of the past in a way to be able to move forward with healing. And as Feliciana talks about these ceremonies and talks about the language, I feel like I didn't have a full grasp of what that meant, but I was really compelled with the idea that as we were talking about the power of the language, how words and this kind of confession of a sorts could be that, even as Feliciana talks about as she's becoming more popular as a healer, she's being visited by all of these people from different cultures, people that don't speak the same language, and how they are able to commune and meet each other in the middle, even without actual language. So it's also in some ways about how that transcends. So again, this explores a lot of ideas, and the structure of this is so interesting and fascinating, both within the context of what I think the book is exploring and saying, and also because I have been very interested recently in this idea of non-Aristotelian plot structure, especially exploring different forms of structure and storytelling as part of reading diversely, and I don't have larger thoughts to articulate on that at this moment, but this was definitely a different kind of structure, a different kind of shaping of a story than like an Aristotelian model. So definitely super, super compelling. And if you have read this, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. Additionally, if you have read her other work, I would love to hear thoughts on it because I'm thinking I might need to dive into that as well. But yeah, that was my reading this month. Not too shabby. I will not complain. Thanks for hanging out and listening while I talked through it. If you've read any of these books, I would of course be interested in hearing your thoughts as well. Read something good, like and subscribe if you feel like it, and yeah, bye.